Good morning. Today is the 10th day of Nisan. Only 3 more days until Passover. And we are in the 5th reading of Metzora. It's also the 18th of April. The 5th reading starts with a summary of everything we saw regarding the person who's afflicted with Tzaraat. I'll just read the verse. It's Leviticus 14:54. All this is the law for every lesion of tzaraat, for a netik, for tzaraat of garments and houses. We missed this week the tzaraat of houses. For a wool white spot, for an egg membrane white or lime white spot, and for a snow white spot, and so on. And then the Torah continues to describe another form of defilement or impurity, which is called a zav. And this is a very strange thing. It exists today still. There is still such a thing. The people have a discharge that is non-seminal fluid. It's not semen, and it just happens spontaneously. The discharge itself is ritually defiled, but if this happens to a person more than twice and 3 times, then he becomes what we call a zav. And he has a special ritual which is very similar to a woman who has also what in the time of the Torah was considered an abnormal discharge of menstrual blood. There's 2 types of menstrual blood. There's the blood that's expected from the menstrual cycle, but there's also blood that takes longer, more than 7 days, and then she automatically becomes a zavagdola, also the same word. And they have a more complex ritual. They also have to bring an offering to the temple. But normally, if a person just has a discharge of seminal fluid, or if a woman just has a menstrual cycle, regular, then it's just to immerse in water. So in the 5th reading, we only learn about the masculine abnormality. And obviously this is connected somehow to the Metzora. It's not clear why. Why would this be in any sense connected to the Metzora, that it would appear in this parsha? And specifically right after we finished summing up all the laws of the Metzora. Why is this the first one? What we're going to discuss today is a very interesting thing, which is how Hasidic thought sees such abnormal discharges and where they come from, what their origin is. And if you understand this, we talked a lot about the origin of tzaraat and why it's the light of mother without the light of father, or bina without chokhmah. And we didn't explain fully what this meant, but we'll explain it a lot more today. And in Hasidic thought, these 2 aspects that are called the light of mother and the light of father relate to the different ways in which a person contemplates divinity. There's 2 general ways in the world to contemplate divinity. These exist in general by all people. The Torah adds a 3rd. But let's look first of all at the first 2, the ones that are part of how human beings have come to contemplate and meditate upon divinity. The easiest way, and this is what we find mostly in the Eastern type of practices, is to contemplate divinity as nothingness, or what we call in Hebrew ayin. To contemplate divinity as nothingness leads to a very interesting and important aspect of contemplating God, which is that God is transcendent. He's beyond. But most of all, he's not related to the world we see. Now, why would we still call this contemplating God if this is taking us out of the world? Because when we take the example of the Metzora, of the person afflicted with Tzarat, it becomes very clear that if a person cannot see the nothingness behind everything, there is no sense of unity of everything. Let me try to impress this on you. That we always talk about the fact that when we look at the world, we see a multiplicity of agents, of actions, of wills, of free wills, and phenomena without end. We don't see the connection between them. It's very hard to see how everything is really connected. In fact, it's literally impossible. Contemplating God as nothingness does not mean that we're searching to negate God and say that He's not anything. Rather, by saying that He's the nothingness behind everything, we're saying that there's a substrate, there's a foundation upon which everything exists. And this foundation is in everything. There's nothing that doesn't sit on top of this nothingness. And so the Eastern thought is very much based on this. And that's why they continue all the time to contemplate God as nothingness, trying to attain a state of oneness with everything. That's their final goal. To dissociate, to tear apart the regular limitations, the limits on reality that we usually encounter. And what we mean by limits on reality is that I am I and you are you. They want to tear that apart. They want to feel that I am you and you are I. We're all the same. And the way to do this, the way to contemplate this properly, is to have a sense of the nothingness behind everything. That is called the light of Father. That's called Or Abba. We said that the Metzora is lacking that. The reason that he could, to begin with, even speak slanderously and speak ill of someone else is because he doesn't have enough of that contemplation. Meaning he only feels the separation. He only feels this world, this physical world. In this physical world, the world of God's immanence is where God appears as many, many, many different separate, seemingly separate entities. And they're all arguing with each other. We've talked about this many times. They're all struggling with each other to see who dominates. So first of all, we have this very spiritual, very correct in and of itself way of understanding godliness, that God is nothingness. There's another way which was always also practiced by people. All human beings practice this. I don't mean every single human being. I mean in every single culture there were people who practiced this other type of meditation and contemplation of godliness, and they did so by contemplating nature. And they are looking at God's immanence. They're looking at how God appears as all the natural forces around us. The natural forces around us, well, we know how to study them. They also knew how to study them 3,000 years ago, but they had different techniques and different ideas about them. So you can say some of what they said was correct, some of what they said was preposterous. It doesn't matter. The point was they were studying nature in order to reveal godliness. And that's the gist of even all the Greek inquiry. All the Greek philosophy is going in that direction. It's trying to reveal God through nature. Which is why Maimonides, in the beginning of his discussion of loving God and fearing God, says, what is the way to come to love God and fear God? By contemplating nature. Because that was the form of meditation and contemplation that he, in a sense, inherited from the Greeks. It doesn't mean that Maimonides didn't do anything with it. He converted it into Judaism, because he said, you can't contemplate reality when you assume that reality is separate from God. That he didn't accept. The way that the Greeks tried to say that the world is without beginning. It's as infinite as God is infinite. Reality and God are two infinite beings. That he, of course, discredited. But to come to understand godliness within reality, that's a second form of contemplation. That is called the light of Ima. That's called the light of Bina, of understanding. And those are two different ways of contemplating God that are found pretty much throughout all of humanity. There are the mystics, and the mystics are constantly looking for godliness as something that is nothingness behind everything, that's tying everything together. And there are the realists who are trying to understand God through our experience, our physical, mundane experience, be it through nature, through human affairs, through whatever it is. And they end up with a picture of God which is always very difficult. It's very difficult to work with it, and we'll explain that more tomorrow why. But the Metzora is a person, like we've just explained, who is lacking the light of the Father. He doesn't see that everything is connected. The same is true of the Zav that we just mentioned, the abnormal non-seminal discharge from a male. That is also a lack of the contemplation, or not even, doesn't have to be necessarily a lack, it could also be a blemish in it, that the person is missing something about it. We'll say something more about that tomorrow, what could be missing. But the idea in this non-seminal discharge is that the person does not see that everything is connected, and therefore does not see the consequences of all his actions. So by the Metzora, we usually say it's just a blemish, or it's a lack of the light of God. And in the Zav, the abnormal male discharge, we describe it as a blemish in the foundation of the light of Father, in the Yesod Abba. There's a problem there. Let's think for a moment, who is the epitome of Yesod Abba in the world? That was Moses. When Moses came out the first time to go between his people, and he saw an Egyptian man killing or beating up one of his brothers, it says, right away. That was a feeling of Yesod Abba, meaning that I have a responsibility for everything in this world. I can't remain just in a state that says everything is connected. To have a foundation means to affect things. And this person is maybe even understanding that things are connected, but he doesn't see his responsibility for fixing things. This would be today, I would venture to guess, like someone who understands everything about recycling. Let's say that really is needed. Assuming that, let's say it's really needed, that you have to recycle because otherwise the resources we're losing resources. Assuming that that's all correct, then someone who would come and say, I know how to write research papers about this, but I myself don't recycle. So that would be a person who has the light of Father. He sees the connection between everything, and recycling is a very cute thing, that you sort of take something from being into non-being, and then bring it back into being. You take it from a yesh into an ayin and bring it back to a yesh. So you have to have some conception of what this ayin, right? You take the thing that you're recycling and you turn it back into a formless blob, and then you reform it back into what you want. Form is bina, that's being. So this person, he understands that there's ayin, he understands what the recycling does, but he himself says, I don't practice this. Why? Because I can't have any impact. It won't do anything. He's given up maybe, or maybe he just says, I don't care. I can't impact it anyway, I simply don't care. So that would be the Zav. Tomorrow, God willing, we'll take a deeper look at why the meditation on nature, on God as immanent, leads to the other forms of defilement, which have to do with the female menstrual cycle. Why those are specifically connected to meditation upon God as being, God as part of reality. Now again, the whole point here is that it's very hard to do these meditations on the ayin perfectly, and so not everybody is a mystic, not everybody engages in this, but if somebody does engage in this, if somebody is connected to this type of thought, this type of contemplation, they do have a risk of blemishing it. And again, the blemish of it, we'll talk more about that tomorrow, because we'll talk about the blemish in the Ima and the Abba together. So today what we have is just this first part of the puzzle here, that the Zav and the Metzora, they represent a problem with meditating on God as nothingness. Now we mentioned that there's a third type of meditation that only in the Torah exists. And that is, well, it only has any kind of anything real to meditate upon in the Torah. It could be that someone else will meditate upon it, but they'll have nothing to look at. And that is, and we'll talk maybe more about that tomorrow, is meditation on God's will, which is beyond both the being of the world and the non-being, the ayin, the nothingness of meditating on Chokhmah, on Or Abba, on the light of Father. So with this we'll end today, and God willing, hopefully continue this topic tomorrow. There's levels upon levels of meaning here. We didn't start from the Zohar where this all comes from. Maybe at some point later in time we'll get a chance to look at the original Zohar. Specifically, this is related to second Passover, the 14th day of Iyar, this whole topic, which is a day on which people who were defiled could bring the Passover, the Paschal lamb. Anyway, so a lot of things that have to do with defilement are discussed in the Zohar in relation to the second Passover. So God willing, when we get there, the 14th of Iyar, in about a month and a few days, maybe we'll get a chance to discuss this even more. Thanks for joining. All the best.